This is a Leica IIIF with the black dial that I recently acquired. And here I've got all the tools that I will need to take apart the main assembly, remove the bottom section and the top section. I'm doing this because the slower shutter speeds from about 40 to 30 tend to stick when using them. And I believe that doing some lubrication and just doing a CLA of the whole camera will help to fix that issue. The first step is to remove the two screws on the black section on the vulcanite on the front. Then the two silver screws on the top section. And then also remove the lens. And the bottom plate. And then on the back, remove the two small silver screws on the top. Here and here. And then on the front, remove the four screws holding down the mounting plate for the lens. And when you do this, before you remove the plate, note the small mark on the side of the mount, which indicates where it goes, and it will go back that way when you reassemble the camera. When you remove this ring here, to keep track of the screws that go with it, what I like to do is take the ring and put the screws into the holes so that you know which screws go with which parts. And then just set that aside. Now that is all the steps to remove the bottom black section here. And once you've done that, you can begin to separate the two halves. Just slowly pull them apart. Just make sure to do it very slowly. And that will happen once you have gotten it apart. Before I got my camera, someone snapped off this small piece of the black vulcanite, and that is possible that that will happen when you take apart your camera. And note the spring plate for the film. This presses the film up against the back inside the camera, and there will be two small little flat springs. These right here. Make sure to keep track of those. And similar to the mounting ring for the lens, what you can do is put the two black screws that go with the body of the camera in their places so you keep track of them, and then simply set the main body off to the side, and then we can continue with the rest of the camera. You could have already done this, but you want to go ahead and remove the take-up spool on the side where the shutter winding knob is. And there are several steps you could go to from here. If you want to access the escapement, the slow speed escapement that is on the bottom here, you will want to remove this front plate and this bottom plate here. However, if you want to go ahead and remove the top plate here to get to all the mechanical parts up here to lubricate them, you won't want to do a different set of steps. Right now I'm going to start with removing this plate on the front of the crate here, and you can skip ahead if you want to just remove the top plate. Alright, first step to removing this front plate here to get to the slow speed escapement is to remove the 4 small screws on, actually there are 4, on this ring here. And note where they go, because there are also some other holes for the mounting ring for the lens. So just keep track of where those 4 screws go. And then you want to remove these 1, 2, 3, 4 screws on the outside of this plate. And then, to remove this plate, what you want to do is you want to slowly start pulling up from the bottom on this whole plate. Lift it up just a little bit, just like that. And then what you want to do is you want to press down this silver part right here so you can pull this forwards. And that removes this plate here, which has the slow shutter speed selection dial on the front, and that has a cam on the back and a arm, which communicates down to the slow speed escapement here. And then the next step is to remove these baffles on the inside. You want to remove this one first. You can use tweezers if you like, but you can just pull them out. One goes like that, and then the next just comes out. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. The tricky part is getting them back in. And just make sure to remember where they go. The next step is to remove this large screw here, and then these 2 smaller screws on this bottom plate. Just like that. And this plate will come off, revealing this mechanism. And then the next step to remove this slower speed escapement here is to remove 2 screws up top. Note that it will be this screw right here and this screw right here. And before you remove these, note that these 2 screws are very similar, but they are not the same length. So you can go ahead and remove this screw. And I have found that the easy way to deal with remembering which is which is to simply not remove one of the screws all the way, simply leave it in the body, or both of them in fact. You can just leave in the body of the camera, like so. And then The slow speed escapement will drop out from the body. You want to keep a finger on that because it will just fall out. Just slowly remove that. And this here is the slow speed escapement. You can note where the spring is on this section. It should be in that position. And you can go ahead and lubricate the small sections of this to improve the operation. Sometimes it can be slow and sticky. And for oiling small mechanisms like this, you can use a needle oiler, which allows you to get into tight spaces and just dispense a tiny little amount of oil. You don't want too much in these tiny little mechanisms. That is the sound of the operation of the escapement. It may be necessary to put this slow speed escapement into a solvent bath for a little while and let all the gunk and everything get off of it and then lubricate it. If your escapement is sticky and slow, that may be necessary. And then once you've done that, to place the escapement back in, what you want to do is you want to pay attention to how it is oriented. You want to make sure that this black bar here is facing upwards towards you and on the front. Then you want to launch this pin here. What you want to do is you want to guide it into this little arm right there and just lower it on down and it will fall into position. And you can tighten down 2 screws. And the second screw up top. And then moving on to the removal of the top plate. The most difficult part is probably these 2 outer rings on the rangefinder mechanism. And what I did was used a piece of gaff tape around a pair of pliers. The correct way to do it would be to use a ring removal tool. You can probably get them on Amazon or B&H, that sort of place. Not too expensive. So these are already loose. You can just take them off by hand. They are slightly different. The one on the right is larger than the one on the left. Just keep that in mind when taking this apart. And just set those off to the side. And then up top, the next step is to remove the ring around the shutter button. Just unscrew that. Pretty easy. And then you can remove the reverse switch. Just hold it and undo that screw. Right there. Just remove that. And again, you can just put those 2 together to keep track of them. And then you can move on to the viewfinder on the back. Just 2 small screws to remove that. Set that off to the side. And then to protect the 2 small lenses there, to keep them from falling out, what you can do is just take a small piece of masking tape, go ahead and put it over those 2 lenses, just like that, to hold them in place and to protect them. Next up, you can work on removing the flash, the accessory shoe, four small screws here and here. And that just simply lifts off like that. And then inside here you can see this wire which goes to the accessory port on the back here. There. And what you need to do is just take a soldering iron and quickly unsolder that. All you have to do is just stick it in there for just a second and it will come right undone. I have already done that because I've taken the top plate of this camera off recently and didn't redo it, but you will have to resolder that if you want the accessory port to work when you reassemble the camera. Then the next step is to work on the rewind dial. Just pull it up. There will be a small screw for you to remove on this collar. And that allows you to, a little bit more, just remove that screw, and that allows you to remove the rewind dial, just like that. And again, to keep track of that screw, I like to just put a couple turns back into that collar, just to keep track of it so I know where it is. Then moving on to the shutter speed selection and winding knob, what you want to do is there are 3 small screws in a triangle pattern around the outside of the shutter speed selection dial. You want to just give those just 1 or 2 turns out each. Not too much, you don't need to remove them all the way. Just enough for you to be able to lift it off. Just like so. That will allow you to remove it. And you can mark this brass piece where your shutter was. However, I've found that you can simply tell where it is based on the distance between the steps on the shutter speed selection dial, and also because the 1000 doesn't drop down all the way. So when you put it back on, you can just tell where it is that way. However, if you want to keep track of it, you can mark on here, which is what I did before. Then what you want to do is you want to lift up this brass piece as if you were changing the shutter speed, but put it halfway in between the shutter speed selections. And then there are 3 small set screws, just like on the dial itself, that you need to remove. And again, you don't need to remove them all the way, just a couple turns each. Just like so. And that dial comes off just like that. Set that aside. Alright, the next step is to work on removing the winding dial here. And it is important to recognize how exactly you go about doing that. There is this little hole here which allows access to a screw, and what you need to do is you need to lift up and rotate this dial until it lines up with that screw. I've already done that here. You can see. Then what you want to do is put your screwdriver in there and just back out that screw just a couple of turns. Do not take it out, because if you do, it will make it extremely difficult to get it back in. Then once you've done that, what you can do is you can simply take that dial. If it doesn't turn, stop, don't apply too much force, go back and loosen that screw just a little bit more. Just like that. Unwind that dial. And once you've done that, you see that there is a spring washer here. remove that to the side with the dial. And then also there will be the take-up rod and the counting dial, and then the gear that goes inside. Just remove all of those and set them aside. Keep track of each component and where it goes. Then moving on over to the diopter adjustment, you need a tool like this. This is a lens spanner, often used just for general camera disassembly. And this one has interchangeable bits, and you're going to want one that has these flat bits on the front. You want to adjust it to the size of these two slots right here. Make sure that it's right. Tighten it down, and then simply turn on those two slots. And once it's off a little bit of the way, you can just undo it the rest of the way by hand, like so. Set it aside. That simply allows you to remove this, which has an alignment pin on the bottom, which when reassembling you'll want to watch out for that. Just make sure that it goes back in the right spot. Set that aside. And the final piece is these two lenses on the front. This one here you can remove with the disassembly tool. Simply line up the bits like before, and then just back it off. You can also remove this piece by putting a razor blade into those two slots on the side and turning. You want to be careful though not to scratch the chrome finish. And this lens here, you want to very carefully just grab it and go around the edges and pry it out. You can probably just grab it with your fingernails, lift out like so. Just be very careful with that lens. And then finally you want to remove that screw on the front. It's a very short screw. Make sure to keep track of that, separate from the rest of the body screws. And then this step is fairly tricky. To get this top piece off, you need to get it over this viewfinder here. So what that requires is on the front here, you can use a screwdriver, you can just use your fingers. You need to lift it up over the viewfinder like that, and then just slowly walk it up off the body. Like so. Just like that. That gives you access to all the mechanisms up top, and all the stuff that you want to lubricate and clean when you're doing a CLA. And once you remove the top, you want to watch out for two things. One is this spring washer here, set aside. And then you also want to watch out for here, there is a small bushing that goes around this square shaft for the reverse advance lever. On mine, it's like fairly stuck on there, but on yours, it might want to come free, and you might want to watch out to make sure that it doesn't fall somewhere when you remove the top. Alright, now at this stage, you are ready to clean, lubricate, and adjust pretty much all of the main mechanisms that are easily accessible. This video doesn't cover the disassembly of the internal shutter mechanism or the replacement of the curtain. However, that is a much more complicated and lengthy job to replace that or repair that. You can adjust the tightness of the shutter here with these two screws. However, you want to be very careful when doing this, as tightening these can decrease the life of the shutter, and it is very rare that that is the issue with a sticky or slow shutter. Generally, it will be cleaning or removing old grease up in this mechanism up here and that is what you want to mainly focus on when you are cleaning and lubricating the camera when it has a sticky or slow shutter speed. Alright, so from here what you want to do is you want to lubricate a couple points on the top. Essentially, you want to prevent this stuff from sticking or being slower than it should. And you can just put a few little drops of oil on all these spots, not too much, as you don't want it to get into the shutter or the actual curtains themselves. And just put a few drops on all these places, on the gears, and also put a few drops on the journals for the rewind knob and the loading knob, just so those stay nice and smooth. You can go back after a little bit and get up a little bit of the excess oil, just so it doesn't make a mess inside the camera. And from here you have a pretty clear view of all the internal mechanisms of the camera. You can see this lever here, which controls the slow speed escapement down here, which we took out a little earlier. And the way that that works is it presses this lever in and out, and what that does is it changes the contact with the amount of contact that it has with the cam on that rotates around here. And so essentially what it does is this cam here presses this in and out, which changes the amount that it engages with that cam up top here. And the reason that's important is because the adjustment for this can be changed. If you remove this cap on the top, that gives you access to a ring which sets the adjustment in place, and a screw which allows you to fine-tune your slow speeds. Now, if your slow speeds are off or if they aren't working correctly, this is a good place to check. If someone has been in here before you and did not put this back correctly, you can have too much engagement on this cam so that when the slow speeds fire, the cam is so far engaged that it doesn't allow it to go all the way around, so it behaves almost like it's in bulb. That is an issue that I had when I got this camera, as someone has clearly been in here before me. And also from here, it is fairly easy to do several more steps to remove the actual curtains themselves and replace them if they need to be replaced. In addition to being in a good place to replace the curtain if is necessary, you can do a cleaning of the rangefinder assembly and viewfinder assembly here by removing it. There are some good guides online on how to do that. However, take note that if you do take this apart, you will have to recalibrate it and readjust it so the focus is correct. Alright, now that the camera is in all these pieces, it is time to do some reassembly. I'm going to start with these guards here. I'm going to put this one back in first. Keep in mind the orientation that it goes. I'm going to have this section with the notch towards the bottom. I'm going to have this section up here, this section up here with the notch towards the bottom of the crate. And you want to basically just, it's the wrong way. Just want to guide that in. Alright, there we go. Can either be very difficult or very easy. The next step is to put this piece back. That one's pretty straightforward. Just goes in there, like so. Now, when you reassemble this, you have to keep in mind that some of the screws go into those pieces right there. You'll have to make sure that they're lined up. to this front plate. So that's the next step. You want to put this front plate back on. It should just snap into place. Not necessarily snap, just slide neatly. And then you want to make sure that these plates are lined up before you put any other screws in. You can start by dropping those back in. Now, a useful tip for putting together small stuff like this is you can magnetize your screwdriver by simply taking a magnet and just dragging your screwdriver across that magnet a couple of times. And that will easily magnetize your screwdriver so that you can pick up screws quickly and not drop them as you are trying to reassemble the camera. These 4 screws just go into this outer ring, like so. And keep in mind, as I said before, you need to make sure that these are lined up on the inside. They may take a little bit of moving around to get them back into position. Right, and while we're at it, we can also put back on this bottom cover. You want to make sure that it is the right way around. Goes on like that. And you have one larger screw here. And then 2 smaller screws here and here. Now, if you are running into any issues with calibration or the such, there are some readily available service manuals for the Leica IIIF. They're a little bit hard to read and not super well organized. However, they are in fact the original service manuals for the Leica IIIF, and they do contain very specific information for the Leica IIIF if you are doing calibration and adjustment. Now, I haven't had to do any of that sort of stuff, so I'm certainly not an expert on it. However, if you are getting into that sort of thing, if you are taking apart the rangefinder assembly, then you want to take a look at that, and it will require like a little bit more digging to find the relevant information. And then to reassemble the top plate, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and put back, sorry, wrong side. You want to put back on that spring washer. And if you did take off this little spacer here, you want to put that back on. And then you want to very carefully put this back on. What you can do is you can put it off to the side a little bit, off where it's going to be when it actually goes on. And that'll allow you to start sliding it on. Then you want to slide it back over to the side and then slide it down, and it'll kind of snap into place as it snaps over this lens in the front here. And then in pretty much no specific order, you can just start putting back all the little pieces that go on the top, the viewfinder adjustment lever there, and then the ring that goes on there. And then just bring that to finger tightness, and then take your tool here and bring it in the rest of the way. And again, it doesn't have to be too tight, because you may want to take it apart again, and also you don't want to strip out these threads. And then you can move over to this here, the rewind knob. Just put that back up in. And then the collar and knob that go with that. Now you're going to want to line up that hole there with the screw on the rewind knob, and with the collar that the screw goes through. And then simply screw the rest of the way in through the collar. And then it'll snap up and go down, just like that. And then from there, you can put the rewind advanced lever back on. Like so. And then you can work on putting the front lenses back on. This one that presses on, goes onto the right lens, just presses on like that. And then this one screws on, goes on the left. And then tighten it up with the tool. Just like so. And you want to clean those lenses in case they've gotten any fingerprints on them, just with a microfiber cloth. And you can also put the front rings back on that go in front of those lenses. Remember, the smaller one goes on the right, and the larger one goes on the left. And simply finger tight is good enough for these. They don't need to be tightened down super tight. And you can put the small short screw that goes on next to the viewfinder. Like so. Then you want to resolder this wire here. You just put your soldering iron in there and put it back in place. Alright, so once the wire is soldered back in place, you can put the accessory shoe back on, along with the 4 screws that hold that down. So, and you can move on to putting back the shutter, speed selection. You want to put on that brass piece, tighten down the 3 set screws, so. Then you can simply determine where the shutter speed dial is at by moving it around, and you can tell that it's at 1000 when it doesn't see it all the way, like that. So then you can simply put the shutter speed dial back on at 1000, like so, and tighten down those 3 set screws holding that in place. When you do this step, you want to make sure that your shutter is wound so that it is actually at the correct position, so that when you wind it up, it will be at the correct position, and you can wind it by using the shutter speed dial. You do not have to put the winding dial back on for that step. You can then move on to putting back on the winding knob and the gear that goes on the bottom. What you want to do is you want to take it and not put it another way, but line it up, line the little spring up with the notch that goes on that piece there, and just set it in so the spring is inside that notch. Then you want to hold it from the bottom so it doesn't fall out. You want to put the gear on the top so that it sits down on the shaft and lines up with that pin. You want to take your advancement counter dial, put that on, make sure it's lined up. You want to take your winding knob, just put that on, and tighten that all the way down. Like so. And you just want to tighten that set screw on the side to lock that in place. Like so. Alright. Then it comes time to bring the body and the lower section back together, and you want to make sure that the flat springs are in place behind the plate for pressing against the film. And you simply want to take this plate here, and you just want to hold that down in place while you bring 2 halves back together. There's a little piece of the vulcanite that has broken off on mine, and what I do is I just put it back in its place, and then as I bring the 2 halves together, it just holds it in there. And simply move around a little bit until the 2 halves go back together, like so. And you can put the 2 black screws that go on the bottom half, tighten those down, like so. Move around to the back and put on the last 2 screws on the upper half. And then you want to take the mounting ring for the lens. You want to note the position of the mark on the side and make sure that points towards the slower speed adjustment dial. You just want to take those 4 screws and slowly tighten them down. I found that it works well to not tighten them all down all the way all at once. Instead, tighten all of them down most of the way and then go around in a circle and bring them snug. Like so. And then you can simply put the take-up wheel on there. You get your bottom plate, put that back on. Lock that down, like so. And you can bring your lens and put that back on. And you are good to go. Just like that. And all the speeds should work great, including bulb, like so. And the slow speeds all the way down to 1 second. Just like that. And that is the process to clean, lubricate, and possibly do some adjusting for the Leica IIIF.